Hey, Zern listeners, let's watch the Netflix documentary about Hunter Moore. Let's watch.
And told her the situation and that Kayla had been hacked and that her picture was on this website. She looked over at Kayla and said, well, why would you take a picture like this if you didn't want it on the internet?
Yeah, so you have a police officer who says what Hunter Moore is saying. Not that all police officers would say that necessarily, but I imagine a lot would, given the way our culture was back then. And as I say this, I think it's another manifestation not only of misogyny, but also of ageism, where most people back then, particularly in the aughts, who were taking naked photos of themselves were young people. And old people tend not to care about young people or think of them as ridiculous in general, and vice versa to some extent, right? And you will say, well, you shouldn't be a slut then. If you're a young person, you shouldn't take a picture. Now, in today's world, I don't think anyone would, or any rational person would think that, particularly given the laws, but regardless of the laws, I don't think people would say that somehow it's your fault that the pictures are on this website because you took a picture of yourself and emailed it to yourself. Think back then, there's like, well, it's your fault. Like you let something out into the internet, even though it was between your phone and your email account. You let something on the internet, you knew what was going to happen, it's your fault, and you're a bad person. The same argument that is made, it's like, well, why did you dress like that, young woman? That kind of thing. Those are manifestations of sexism, they're manifestations of ageism, they're manifestations of slut shaming and of anti-purity shaming, this kind of thing. Because a lot of people like to think of themselves as like, well, that would never happen to me because I'm pure and I'm a good person, and those are bad people, those are sluts, those are dirty people, and you get what you deserve if you're a dirty person, which is just imagine you're a police officer, serve and protect, and a woman comes in and says, I took a picture of myself, I emailed it to myself, I wasn't going to share it with anyone, someone hacked into my computer, they took the photos. 1, that's a big problem. 2, they posted it on the internet. 3, someone posted it without checking to make sure. 4, it's copyrighted. 5, I reached out to him weeks ago and told him to take it down. He hasn't taken it down. Are you going to help? Now, maybe the police officer says, well, there's nothing I can do because of the way the laws are. But at the very least, you don't have to say, well, you deserved it because you took a picture.
Yeah. Should you do time for sharing pics online?
If I'm dumb enough to send a naked photo of myself to a boyfriend, to a lover, to whatever, and they decide out of vengeance 5 years later when I'm mean to them or whatever to post it somewhere, that's actually my problem.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if it's the majority opinion at the time, but it was prevalent enough that you hear that. It's hard to imagine though, right? If you send a picture to your boyfriend and when you break up with him as a part of revenge, he posts it on the internet, that's on you. I don't know anyone that thinks that today, right? Do people think that anymore?
So my children's fathers basically decided that since I was affiliated with Is Anyone Up, and since I was doing porn now, that it would be in the best interest to keep me out of the children's lives. The whole point of being Butthole Girl was to get my children's photos off of Is Anyone Up.
So is she saying that the father of the children was successful in taking the children away from her? That's what it sounds like, which is just so dumb. I mean, there's nothing wrong with what she was doing. It wasn't endangering the children. It is a problem with society because society looks at it as a disgusting, impure, unchristian thing to do. But there's nothing wrong with her taking pictures of herself and posting on the internet. It doesn't have any rational impact on the children. Might the children be impacted? Yeah, but that's not her fault. That's society's fault. That the kids might be bullied because she posts consensual pictures on the internet for other consenting people to enjoy or be interested in or something. Now, I don't know if a lot of people are going to agree with me on that, but that's how I see it. Like, I remember not that long ago, maybe 20 years ago, I was talking with someone who worked at a restaurant, and maybe he even owned a restaurant, and he was saying that, well, when gay people come into the restaurant, it's okay to discriminate against them and say, you can't be in the restaurant. And I'm thinking, what? He's like, well, I don't think gay people are a problem, but customers do. In fact, a lot of customers think that gay people have HIV. And so we will lose business if we allow gay people into the restaurant. So we reject gay people from my restaurant. I'm not against gay people, but society is against gay people. And so that's not my fault. And that kind of thinking of just like, well, it just is what it is. And thus, the victim should be further victimized because society is the way that it is and there's nothing we can do about it. I'm like, well, that's backwards, right? Like, you can't discriminate against the victim who's already a victim of discrimination because it's convenient to you. It's not okay. So you can't, to her, say, well, okay, she's taking pictures of herself and that's, in and of itself, but the way society is, a similar thing actually was about when I was born. As a half Japanese, half white person, it was pretty common knowledge at the time and commonly held by people that to people of different races, so to speak, the word race is kind of a weird word, but what we consider to be different racial groups, Asian American, white American, it was okay for them to get married, of course, but if they have kids, the kids are going to be bullied because of their mixed status, and thus they shouldn't get married and they definitely shouldn't have kids. So again, that's not right. You can't blame the victim and restrict the victim. You need to start working on society, right? A similar thing where I don't hear people saying this anymore, but there are often negative outcomes about being gay. For example, you might have an increase in suicidal thoughts. And the religious right or anti-gay people would say, look, being gay has all these bad things about it, thus we should help people not be gay. Again, that's blaming the victim. Instead of saying, well, the reason why they're suicidal is because society is actively rejecting them and harming them and abusing them. And so there's obviously an increase in mental health issues, including suicidal thoughts. So to make them not gay is to tell her, you can't have your kids. There's nothing. Now, maybe there were other allegations that were present that made the court believe that she was not a good mother, regardless of the pictures she was submitting. And I'm pretty sure in 50 years, people will agree with me on this. I don't know. Maybe they won't. And maybe I'm wrong. What do you think? Tell me what you think. But that's how I see it. There's nothing wrong with the picture she was taking. And a lot of people will provide this content on the internet. They have kids and they keep the two things separate. The kids don't know about it. As long as we have a rational, healthy way of looking at sex in a sex positive way in a society, and we don't bully the children and we don't bully her, what's the diff? But anyway, we have a tragedy here where the only reason why she submitted more of the pictures was because she was trying to get that picture taken down. And ironically, as a result, she has her children taken away from her because she was trying to protect her children.
I thought the best way to deal with the photo was to do nothing about it. You give it attention and it gets worse.
Charles just said, don't worry about it. Just move on. Leave it up there. People will forget about it anyway.
And Kayla got very upset, jumped up. I knew we shouldn't have told him, and she just kind of goes...
Yeah, so this is another system of power that keeps the oppressed in the oppressed, powerless position, which is when you go to the authorities, which they've done, and when you even go to your parents, you will get pushback. You will get like, don't worry about it. What's the big deal? You're making a mountain out of a molehill. You deserved it. All those messages are in place to keep the powerless in a powerless position. And there are multiple mechanisms in our society regarding all sorts of every oppressed group has all sorts of mechanisms in place. And we enact those mechanisms as a people, as a society. We enact those. There's not some organization, there's not an Illuminati of people who enact these mechanisms to keep the powerless in a powerless position. We teach these mechanisms to our children. Those children grow up to enact those mechanisms. Those people will teach their children, and there are government systems and societal systems and marketing systems and economic systems and capitalistic systems and religious systems that are all in involved in that effort. It's not a conscious effort, but the end result is oppression. Sometimes it is conscious, of course, but sometimes it's not. So you have the stepdad who hears this atrocious crime that at least should be a crime. Well, it is a crime because it's hacked, but at the very least, just having it on the internet. Anyway, so he hears about it. It's his stepdaughter that he has raised since she was very young. And he's just like, don't worry about it. Now, from his perspective, he was saying earlier, he didn't know the internet. So he's just like, well, what's the harm? Like, a few people saw that, big deal. Just don't go on the internet anymore, that kind of attitude. And from his perspective, that makes sense to him. If he were more aware, which I'm guessing he is now, by 2022, then he wouldn't say such a thing. But it's all these kinds of mechanisms that keep women in their place, that keep young people in their place, that keep the impure people in their place. But any group you talk about that's oppressed, people without homes, there's all sorts of mechanisms in the press to blame them. It must be their fault, they're lazy, all these kinds of things. And all those ideas are infused in the system of the economy, the political system, and so on. So we're seeing an example of that with the stepdad. And one of the systems of control that I was talking about earlier is an economic system of control that is not present with this case. The woman, I can't remember her name, she, I think, comes from a rich family. Her stepfather is a lawyer. They have a nice house. The mom has a lot of free time. At least she can take work off, or she doesn't work at all. So this young woman who was wronged, she probably wouldn't have been able to do anything because of the limitations of time and access, because the mom she's going to police station. That's another thing, is like, she knows, as a middle or upper class individual, you know how to talk in a way that garners respect and people complying, or at least listening to you. She went to the FBI. Imagine a lot of people, they don't even know how to contact the FBI. So even with that privilege, so you imagine all the other people, like that other woman that we saw being interviewed, that has, I'm guessing, none of those privileges and has no way to fight back against Hunter Moore. But even with that privilege that this young woman has, with the daughter of this woman, they're still not getting any help because of all the other mechanisms in place that keep young women, particularly young women who post naked pictures or are thought to do so, in their place. All right, well, that's it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.